If you think Tennessee begins and ends with famous highways and postcard towns, think again. Tucked beyond the interstates are places where time didn't slow down. It simply never bothered to speed up. These aren't polished tourist towns built for weekend traffic or souvenir photos. They're the kind of places where main streets still matter. People wave because they mean it, and the loudest sound at noon might be a church bell keeping honest time. This is Tennessee before algorithms and express lanes got involved. So pause for a moment. Set down the endless scroll, refill your coffee, and recalibrate your sense of pace. What you're about to see isn't nostalgia for show. It's daily life in towns that never asked to modernize for anyone's approval. And if that sounds refreshing, you're in the right place. Stick around, like the video, and subscribe, because once we start counting down these hidden Tennessee gems, you may find yourself seriously reconsidering what getting away from it all really means. 10. Granville, Tennessee. Nestled along the Cumberland River roughly an hour east of Nashville, Granville doesn't just feel historic. It actively lives in the past, and proudly so. This is not a town that preserved a few buildings for tourism and moved on. Granville has leaned all the way in. Locals affectionately call it Tennessee's Mayberry Town, and the comparison holds up the moment you arrive. The pace slows instantly. Cell service feels optional. Conversation does not. At the heart of town sits an 1800s-era general store that still operates much as it always has, serving scoops of ice cream, jars of penny candy, and the kind of small talk that makes you forget what time it is. Vintage cars casually rumble down Main Street, not as part of a reenactment, but because their owners simply enjoy driving them. Around every corner, tiny museums celebrate the unexpected, quilting traditions, antique whiskey decanters, and even a lovingly curated tribute to I Love Lucy. None of it feels staged. It feels personal. Granville's Pioneer Village brings together restored Victorian buildings, frontier-era homes, and seasonal bluegrass jams that spill into the open air. On weekends, musicians gather without a schedule, neighbors pull up chairs, and visitors are gently absorbed into the rhythm. 9. Bellbuckle, Tennessee. Small but mighty is the only way to describe Bellbuckle, a town whose entire historic downtown is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. That distinction alone tells you this is not a place rushing to modernize at the expense of its soul. Bellbuckle has chosen preservation, and it wears it well. Every brick storefront, wooden awning, and iron lamppost feels intentional, as if the town collectively agreed that history was worth keeping visible rather than boxed up in a museum. What truly defines Bellbuckle is its creative pulse. This is an arts town at heart. Victorian-era buildings that once housed dry goods and rail offices now brim with antique shops, artisan galleries, and small craft stores selling handmade jewelry, textiles, pottery, soaps, and folk art. You don't browse here, you linger. Shop owners are usually the makers themselves, happy to explain the story behind a quilt pattern or a hand-thrown mug. Each July, the Web Craft Show transforms the town into a full-blown artisan pilgrimage. Thousands descend on this former railroad hamlet, turning quiet streets into a celebration of Southern craftsmanship and community pride. Yet even outside festival season, Bellbuckle feels curated by time rather than commerce. A simple walk through town is enough to understand its appeal. Buildings dating back to the 1800s still stand shoulder to shoulder, untouched by strip malls or glass facades. 8. Rogersville, Tennessee. Founded in 1775, Rogersville carries its age with a quiet confidence that newer towns simply can't imitate. As Tennessee's second oldest town, it doesn't need plaques on every corner to announce its history. You feel it the moment you step onto Main Street. Much of the downtown architecture from the 18th and 19th centuries remains remarkably intact, creating the rare sensation that time slowed down here out of respect. Federal-style brick storefronts line the street, their proportions and craftsmanship reflecting an era when buildings were made to last, not to trend. Today, Those same structures house cafes, antique shops, and taverns, blending modern life seamlessly into centuries-old walls. One of the town's most significant anchors is the Thomas Amos Historic Site, a preserved blockhouse, mill, and store that dates back to the 1780s. This was not just a building, but the nucleus around which Rogersville grew, an early commercial and social hub when the frontier still pressed close. Standing there, it's easy to imagine wagons rolling in, supplies being traded, and news spreading long before newspapers or telephones existed. What makes Rogersville special isn't just its preserved landmarks, but how naturally they fit into everyday life. Porches still serve their original purpose. Lampposts cast a soft glow rather than harsh LEDs, and limestone steps bear the subtle wear of generations. I break down real US cities with real numbers, housing, taxes, and monthly costs. If that's useful, hit subscribe because I post these every week. 7. Dandridge, Tennessee. Next is Dandridge, the town that wears its history lightly, the way only a town founded in 1783 can. As Tennessee's third oldest town, it doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Instead, it unfolds slowly along the banks of the French Broad River, inviting you to linger. Water defines life here. The town sits between Douglas Lake and Cherokee Lake, two broad, glittering stretches that make fishing less of a hobby and more of a civic expectation. In Dandridge, keeping a rod in the trunk isn't quirky, it's practical. Downtown feels carefully preserved rather than frozen in amber. Main Street's brick storefronts, all listed on the National Register of Historic Places, trace their roots to the 1800s and now house cafes, antique shops, and small boutiques that operate at an unhurried pace. At the center of it all stands the Jefferson County Courthouse, built in 1845. It still dominates the town square, functioning both as a civic symbol and a compact museum of local history. Sitting on its lawn with a glass of sweet tea feels less like a break and more like participation in a long-standing tradition. 6. Hoenwald, Tennessee. Hoenwald may be small, but it carries a sense of significance that far outweighs its size. Tucked into Lewis County, this quiet Tennessee town is best known as the home of the Elephant Sanctuary of Tennessee, a world-renowned refuge where rescued elephants roam across hundreds of protected acres. The sanctuary isn't a zoo or a roadside attraction. It's a working conservation space dedicated to healing and education. Guided experiences give visitors a rare, respectful glimpse into the lives of these animals, making Hoenwald one of the few places in the country where wildlife preservation feels deeply personal. Beyond the elephants, Hoenwald is steeped in layered history. The Lewis County Museum chronicles the town's past from early Natchez Trace pioneers to the Swiss settlers who helped shape the region's character. Artifacts, photographs, and restored interiors tell stories of resilience and frontier life, grounding the town firmly in Tennessee's early narrative. Nature continues that story just outside town limits at Fall Hollow Falls, a 20-foot waterfall hidden in the woods. The short hike to the falls feels like slipping into a painted landscape, quiet, shaded, and refreshingly untouched. What truly defines Hoenwald, though, is its pace. There's no rush here. After a day of exploring, you'll find comfort in local cafes and barbecue joints where conversations linger, and hospitality isn't performative. 5. Tellico Plains, Tennessee. Tellico Plains feels like the kind of place outdoor lovers daydream about and then assume no longer exists. Tucked deep in Monroe County, this quiet mountain town sits right at the gateway to the Cherokee National Forest and the legendary Cherohala Skyway, a sweeping mountain road often ranked among the most beautiful drives in America. From the moment you arrive, it's clear that nature is not a backdrop here. It's the main character. Just minutes from town, Bald River Falls announces itself with a dramatic 90-foot plunge into the Tellico River. The waterfall is so close to the road that it almost feels unreal, yet hiking closer reveals mist, mossy rocks, and a calm that makes time slow to a crawl. The river itself is a playground, tubing on warm afternoons, trout fishing in quieter stretches, or simply sitting on the bank watching the current slide past. For those who prefer their adventure behind the wheel, the Cherahalla Skyway winds through high-elevation forests and overlooks that seem designed for long pauses and deep breaths. What makes Tellico Plains special isn't just the scenery, it's the feeling of escape. There are no crowds, no neon signs, no sense of urgency. Evenings are defined by porch lights, campfires, and conversations that stretch under star-filled skies. 4. Rugby, Tennessee. Historic Rugby feels less like a town you visit and more like a story you step into. Perched high on the Cumberland Plateau, Rugby was deliberately founded in 1880 by British author and social reformer Thomas Hughes, who envisioned it as a class-free utopian colony, a New Jerusalem where educated young men from England could farm, read poetry, debate philosophy, and live morally upright lives far from the pressures of Victorian Britain. At its height, Rugby contained around 60 ornate Victorian-era buildings and was home to roughly 300 English colonists, complete with boarding houses, libraries, a printing press, and even lawn tennis matches worthy of the era. Reality, however, proved less romantic. Rocky soil, harsh winters, and financial troubles gradually drove most residents away. By the early 20th century, the grand experiment had largely faded into obscurity. What makes Rugby remarkable today is not its failure, but its resurrection. Beginning in the 1960s, preservationists painstakingly restored the remaining buildings, breathing life back into the village while honoring its original vision. Today, Rugby operates as a living museum. Visitors can tour preserved inns, cottages, a chapel, and the original library, each furnished to reflect daily life in the late 1800s. The streets are quiet, immaculately kept, and eerily transportive. 3. Leiper's Fork, Tennessee. Just 20 miles southwest of Nashville, Leiper's Fork manages to pull off a rare trick. It sits practically next door to a major music city, yet feels completely unplugged from it. The moment you roll into town, the pace drops several notches. This is not a place that hurries, explains itself, or tries to impress you with spectacle. Leiper's Fork simply exists, comfortably, creatively, and on its own terms. At its core, the village is a loose, come-as-you-are collection of rustic storefronts, art galleries, and antique shops stitched together by gravel roads and front porches. Converted barns double as studios where local artists display paintings, pottery, and handmade furniture. On warm afternoons, farmers line the sidewalks selling homemade jams, honey, and baked goods, while musicians casually pick banjos and guitars as if live music were just another utility, like water or electricity. There's no performance schedule. You either catch it or you don't. Leiper's Fork's creative energy runs deep, shaped by artists, songwriters, and craftsmen who deliberately chose this quieter life over city buzz. That same ethos carries into its food and drink scene. Local cafes serve unfussy Southern comfort dishes, meant to be eaten slowly. And then there's Leiper's Fork Distillery, where small-batch whiskey and moonshine are crafted on site. Sipping a glass while watching the sun slide behind rolling farmland feels less like a tasting and more like a ritual, one that rewards patience. As evening settles in, the transformation is complete. The traffic thins, the music softens, and lantern light replaces neon glow. Porch swings creak, conversations linger, and the stars feel closer than they should be this near to a city. By nightfall, it's hard to believe Broadway is only a short drive away. Quick pause here before we proceed to the top 2, because this is kind of the point of the entire video. I don't do dreamy highlight reels or vague, you could live here energy. I break down real US cities using real numbers, and what houses actually cost, what taxes look like, and what your monthly expenses would be once the romantic fog clears. If that kind of grounded, no-nonsense breakdown helps you think more clearly about where to live or retire, go ahead and subscribe. I post these analyses every week, and they're built to save you time, money, and unrealistic expectations. 2. Jonesborough, Tennessee. Jonesborough proudly wears the title of Tennessee's oldest town, founded in 1779, and unlike places that merely market their age, this one genuinely lives inside it. From the moment you step onto its brick-lined Main Street, the town feels settled, as if it figured out who it was 2 centuries ago and never felt the need to reinvent itself. The Victorian-era storefronts aren't decorative holdovers, they're still in use, housing antique shops, local cafes, bookstores, and small businesses that move at a human pace. Even the courthouse anchoring the historic square feels less like an institution and more like a long-standing neighbor that's seen everything and has nothing left to prove. What truly distinguishes Jonesborough, however, is not just its architecture, but its reverence for storytelling as a civic identity. Every October, the town becomes the epicenter of oral tradition during the National Storytelling Festival, when master storytellers and visitors from around the world gather to trade folktales, legends, and personal histories. It's not treated as a novelty event. It's a continuation of Appalachian culture where stories have always served as currency, entertainment, and education, all rolled into one. Outside of festival season, that same respect for the past carries on quietly through local museums like the Chester Inn, built in 1797, which preserves early Appalachian life with an intimacy that feels personal rather than curated. Jonesborough has a way of making history feel accessible instead of academic. Porch conversations linger. Shopkeepers greet you like they've been expecting you, and it's not unusual to hear live music drifting from somewhere just out of sight. 1. Dayton, Tennessee. At first glance, Dayton's downtown reads like a postcard version of a southern town square. Brick sidewalks warmed by the sun, a modest fountain at the center, locally owned shops, and the kind of calm that suggests nothing much ever happens here. That impression lasts until you realize that one of the most consequential courtroom dramas in American history unfolded right in the middle of it. In 1925, Dayton became the unlikely stage for the Scopes monkey trial, a national spectacle that pitted science against religious traditionalism when local teacher John T. Scopes was prosecuted for teaching evolution. What looked like an ordinary county courthouse suddenly became the focal point of a cultural reckoning. Today, the Rhea County Courthouse still stands, and you can walk directly into the same courtroom where Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan squared off under the glare of national media. The space has been carefully preserved, not dramatized, and that restraint makes it more powerful. Downstairs, the accompanying museum houses photographs, documents, and artifacts that ground the trial in its human details. It's history you don't just read about, you physically inhabit it, standing where arguments that shaped modern American education were once shouted across the room. Step back outside, and you're immediately returned to the present, where locals sip craft beer at Monkeytown Brewing, chat on shaded benches, or head toward the Tennessee River with fishing gear in hand. The river itself offers a slower counterpoint to the town's famous moment, inviting kayaking, casting a line, or simply watching the water drift past. And there you have it. 10 towns so charming they double as time machines. No flux capacitor needed. Now seriously, switch off your phone, call your wanderlust, hit the road, and hit the subscribe button. These small towns are living proof that sometimes the best way to get ahead is to go way behind in time. Safe travels. And hey, if someone offers you a horse and buggy instead of an Uber, take it as a compliment.